Welcome to this introduction to graph analytics through visualization. In this workshop, we're going to be exploring how to look at graph data and how to explore it using GraphXR's 3D visualization capabilities. Now, the way we're going to do that is introduce you to what is a label property graph, or better known as property graphs. Second, we're going to look at how to connect the GraphXR project to a Neo4j sandbox to simulate real-world use cases in crime investigation and detection. And third, we're going to pull a bunch of data into the GraphXR project so that we can quickly visualize and explore connected patterns in the data. Now, to get started, there's no prerequisites, so if you're starting from scratch, well, welcome aboard. So, let's get started. First thing first. What is a label property graph, right? A graph is essentially a way of encoding information. In this case, it's going to be nodes, connected edges, and their properties. So briefly, a node is a person, a location, an event, right? Edges are going to be things that define how those entities are related. And properties will be the characteristics of nodes and edges. Now, the resulting pattern of all those connected nodes and edges is going to be our graph. Now, in GraphXR and in many graph databases, we're going to be working with the label property graph. Now, the label property graph consists of the vertices of the graph, which are our nodes. And like I said, those are going to be the people or locations. Second, the edges, which are the connections between those nodes, are going to be identified by their source and target nodes. And then they'll have a descriptive label such as knows. So this person knows this person. And then last thing to note is key value pairs. Key value pairs are for properties of nodes and edges, and they're going to include unique classifiers such as name, Andy, or age, 32 years old. So that just gives you a brief example of what that looks like, as you can see here as well. Alright, so right here we're looking at a simple property graph. Here we're looking at people contracted by different companies, right? So here our person node is our source node, and our target node is our company, as we can see by the arrow of our relationship. Now, the person node has its own properties, including their name, their education, their license, right? And here we can see this one person has two companies that they've worked for, and that relationship works for has its own properties, which are the start year and the end year. And then we also have the companies, which also have their properties for the name and revenue that they've made. Now, this is just a simple example, but the reason why we use property graphs is really to have an intuitive way to visualize our data and the patterns. It makes it efficient for querying and traversing the graph, which is especially useful when it's large or even a streaming data set. And lastly, it makes it easy for data modeling. It's extensible. You can add or simplify your graph, and also fuse data from diverse sources. So that can be tabular data like CSV or SQL, document data like XML or JSON, and you can have this complete view of your connected data sources. So let's go through a simple example here, and I'm going to look at a call log, right? So this call log, each row is a call that's made from one person to another, and it has a time, a date, and a duration of that call. Now, if I were to just simply download this as a CSV file, which I could from Google Docs, I can go into an empty GraphXR project, drag and drop it in the graph space, and there you go. I have nodes. And what are these nodes exactly? If I put the quick info on, if if I hover over the nodes, you'll notice essentially that each row in our table transformed into a node in the graph space, right? And while this is not necessarily how we want to visualize it, this is a quick and rapid way of bringing your tabular data into the graph and working on it from there. Quick import, right? So in reality, what we want to do is we want to map out those columns to show who made these calls, right? So from one person to another, right? So we're going to have a source node and a target node and a relationship. And so those columns you'll see here, the call from is going to be a person node with a name property. And the call to is going to be the target node. And then we're going to have this called relationship where we'll put the date and time, the duration, and the call ID. And so when we model that in GraphXR using the CSV mapping editor, we're going to get something that looks a little bit like this. Now, you're going to quickly see when you do that, when you map the source and target nodes as people, you're going to see central people in the network. So this Bob, for instance, is receiving a bunch of calls. He's also made a couple, and so forth. And I can set the icons to make this look like people behind the graph really quick. Actually, let's do that one more time. Now, when you model this in GraphXR, now using the CSV mapping editor, now taking the CSV mapping editor on this CSV that we just showed here, putting that in GraphXR, it's going to look like this. So we're going to see the people behind those calls and where those calls were made to. And quickly we can observe certain central people in the network. Here we can see Bob is on the receiving end of a lot of calls, for example. Now let's quickly go over how we would save this work in case we wanted to come back to it. The way we would do that is if we go to the left hand side here on the project, we can go to the data tab and we can save this as a GraphXR file. We can also save it back to Neo4j. We can also save it as a CSV. So if we save it as a CSV, it's going to look like this, where we have a folder, and that folder is going to contain labels and relationships. Those labels are going to be our categories, which are our nodes, correct? So this, in this case, is person, and our relationship is going to be that called relationship. Now with a very complex graph, you're going to have multiple labels and multiple relationships, for example. So in the real world, the graph is often more complex. And for that, we go to Neo4j Sandbox, which provides a much larger and more complicated property graph dataset for us to explore in GraphXR. Neo4j makes it freely available, no download required. So let's get up and running and connected. So if you type in Neo4j into Google, you'll be guided here, or Neo4j Sandbox, neo4j.com/sandbox. You can launch a free sandbox here. When you launch a sandbox, it will guide you to log in, right? You'll just have to put your name and then create a password. I'm going to log into mine since I've used this before. So once you log into the Neo4j Sandbox, you're going to see a bunch of examples that they provide to explore. For this example, we're just going to look at the crime investigations sandbox and click create. And it takes a few seconds to load the sandbox. Once you've loaded it, you'll notice that it says it expires in 3 days. You can extend that for 10 days, but you can also look at this data set in AuraDB. So there's several ways of going about it, but this is just a quick way of being able to understand the graph and do it really quickly. Now, connection details are going to be the important part. Here we're going to want to take note of the IP address and the password. Now, let's get you started with GraphXR project, and once we get started with that, we're going to configure that project to this Neo4j sandbox and load the data that way. Okay, so we're going to take note of the IP address and the password when we create a GraphXR project. Alright, so to get started with GraphXR, same thing, you don't need to download anything. You just need to go to graphxrnext.kinaviz.com/register, and you're just going to have to put your email and name and create a password, agree to the terms of use, and sign up. So once you sign up and enter the GraphXR space, you're going to be welcomed by a project's homepage like this. As you'll see, there's nothing there at the moment, but we can start by creating our first project. So we're going to click this plus sign. I'm going to type a name for that project. For this example, I'm just going to do the crime investigations. And I'm going to select this configure Neo4j instance. Now, like I said, this IP address, I'm going to want to copy that and copy it to the Neo4j host. And then take the password that they provide you as well and put it in for the Neo4j password. Now here you have two options, direct browser connection or through GraphXR server connection. I'm going to click the through GraphXR server connection to share this project and create views that can be shared with other people as well. The direct project connection is good for if you want to keep everything local to your computer. You don't want anything saved into the GraphXR cloud. Alright, so I'm going to confirm. And now we have that project. I can enter this project. And here we are. So this is the empty GraphXR space. I'm going to move over to the top left here. There's going to be a hamburger menu that pulls up the side panel. And we're going to be exploring a lot of these functionalities here. But to get started, let's look at this project and what we have. So under the category tab, we're going to see all these different categories already populated. That's because we're connected to the Neo4j sandbox. And if we go back to that schema, that data model that I showed you earlier, you're going to see all those different categories already labeled on the back end, because this is a connected data store, right? Because this is all connected through Neo4j, right? So going back to my graph, I'm going to just sample a few crime nodes into the graph space, and I can do that by just selecting the category and clicking pool, and I'm sampling about 25 nodes every time I click pool here. And I know that there are relationships associated with the crime node, and I want to pull in locations, which is over here, and that has the occurred at relationship. So I can go to the relationship tab here, click this occurred at relationship, and start to pull in those locations. Remember, when you pull in relationships, they are identified by their source and target node, right? So we're bringing in the target node, which is the location. Alright, so I have some locations, I have some crimes. Let's close this panel and zoom out a little bit. Now you'll notice that we're in 3D graph space. And I can zoom in and zoom out just using the mouse wheel on my mouse. Or you can also use this bottom toolbar here to navigate going in and going out. It's a little slower. That's okay. You can also left click and drag to move from left to right in your graph. You can right click and drag to orbit your graph, right? And a really fun one to do is Control O, and you can orbit your graph using like a turntable feature. And it makes it really pretty. But also if you get dizzy, you can just click Control O and stop. There we go. If I click the Quick Info panel, I can hover over the nodes and see what's going on. So in this crime node, I have that date and that type of crime. This location, I'm going to see that I have lat long and postcodes. It's going to be handy. Now in this data set, I can already see there's some locations that have multiple crimes associated with them. So let's say I want to look at this node here. I can use the info tool here, or I can just right click and click info to see what those properties are, right? Another unique feature is being able to see the neighbors of that node. So this is everything connected to that location. And it just zooms it up for you. So, or this allows you to zoom in a bit easier. I can hover over those nodes and see which crimes are associated with this location: violence, other theft, criminal damage, arson. Alright, so you can exit that. And then we're going to go over some basic selection here. So commonly you will use the right legend here is used to select by category or relationship. So I can select crime, all the crime nodes in my graph, or all the location nodes. I can also select relationships, for example. I can select multiple things by Control left click again, right, to add. Alright. Now I can select everything in my graph by Control A, and then I can click in the empty space to deselect. If I have a much more customized selection I want to make for whatever reason, I can Shift left click and draw a box over a group of nodes and select them. I can Control left click to add to that selection. I can Option or Alt left click to delete from that selection. Alright, so I'm going to rotate my graph here. And let's just say I have an interesting cluster of nodes I want to look at and investigate further, but I don't want to see anything else. What I will do often is, let's say I select this node here. This is a location, right? I can trace a neighbor on that location. Right now we only have 1 degree of separation. And what that does is highlights those nodes. And then I can select those nodes and say, okay, that's what I want to see, and I want to get rid of everything else. The way I would do that is use this inverse selection tool. And then I would use the hide selection right next to that to just get my graph narrowed in on this one location and these 4 different crimes, right? Now you'll notice there's a pin icon. That's because we're pinning it in space. The default is the force layout, as you can see. If I wanted to get rid of that pin icon, which I often do sometimes, you go to the settings tab and you can hide that pin icon as such. Alright, now let's say I explored this a bit and I want everything to come back. Remember, I just hid the other nodes, so I can unhide those nodes and bring everything else back into the graph space. So that was a quick overview of selection. Now let's look more into the data that we have here. Going to the left here, I often pull out the table view, and I can see that we have the date, we have the ID of the crime, the last outcome, in the type. We also have location, lat long attributes in the address. So I want to map this because there's locations with lat long, and because of that I can immediately tie those nodes to the map. So I'm going to pull in the map feature. And I'm going to see that it zooms in right away on the UK region. This is the Greater Manchester, the UK. And you'll see that these locations are directly on that map and associated with those crime nodes, right? And I could change the settings of this map by, selecting the settings and deciding whether I want Google or OpenStreetMap, for example. Now when I put this, you can kind of tell that the nodes get lost. I can change the color of the nodes if I wanted to. Make this a bit darker to contrast. And I can change the size of the nodes. In order to change the size of the nodes or in the edges, I would need to go to the Project Settings tab and adjust this toggle, which shows the nodes, and then this toggle, which shows the edges. And so now we can see that a bit better on this type of map, for example. So going back to the map settings, I'm actually going to bring it back to the map box because that's my preference there. And I'm going to use this map control. And what that does, it allows me to zoom in and out of the map region that's in frame. Alright, so now that we have our locations and I've adjusted my map to be in the way that I want it, I click map control again and it freezes that map and the framing that I've created for it, and I have those nodes and I have those crime nodes. So now that I have the map zoomed in the way I like it, I can select map control again so it's not highlighted, and I can now move in and out of the frame without adjusting the map. And I'm going to click the X icon here to close that side panel. So now let's let's hide the map and close this, and let's clear our graph and get started with our next example. Okay, so now let's move on to a more real-world example. Suppose we want to investigate drug crimes and how often and where they're coming from. For that, we're going to use the keyword search and import crimes with the property value that include drug. Then we can use the GraphXR's expand function to pull in other data connected to those crimes, including the location, the officers who are investigating that crime, and the persons who were involved in various ways. So in the keyword search bar, I'm going to actually notice here on the right that I want to search the database. Now when you start a GraphXR from scratch, you're going to have to configure the search index. If I click this gear icon, it's going to show which categories that I want to perform search on. For this example, I'm going to just select all the categories and submit index tags. But if this is a very large data set, I could just pick the few categories I'm going to search by and then submit that. Alright, now that we've configured a search index and I'm searching the database, which is that icon right there, I'm going to type in drug and enter. So once I put drug in there, you'll see that I have 333 crime nodes with a drug listed in the property, and that's going to be under the crime type, as you can see. So if I click this plus icon, I can add those drug nodes into the graph. Now I'm going to deselect those nodes for right now, And now that I have these crime nodes in the graph, I'm going to expand by the relationship to look at other entities connected to these crime nodes. So those crimes are going to have officers who are investigating them, people associated to the crime, and objects, and so forth. So if I control A, or just actually select crime on the top right here, I can right click to expand with selected nodes. You'll see all the relationships associated with these crime nodes. I'm going to select all relationships and click expand. Great. And you're going to notice that there's quite a bit of connection here. Right now I've only pulled in 4 people, right? And I know when I go back to this model that people have a lot of different relationships, person-to-person relationships, right? Actually, now when I look at these categories on the right here, I notice that the person category only has 4 people in the graph, and I can actually pull in more people based on the relationships here that have people connected to each other based on whether they're related to each other, whether they live with each other, they know each other through their social network. So let's see what happens when we expand to look at more people. So I'm going to select the person category, right click and expand, and I'm going to check that family relationship, when they know each other through these different avenues, and I'm going to expand to include those people as well. Alright, now we notice that there's 13 people now. Alright, so let's just say I'm interested in looking at just a part of this graph and anything that is associated with people in that graph. So if I select this person category, that selects all the nodes, all the person nodes in the graph. And I'm going to use the trace neighbor feature, as I mentioned earlier, and you can see there's 12 degrees. So if I drag it out, I can walk down the degree of connection here and highlight all those nodes. Then I'm going to use this select visible nodes shortcut here to make everything that's highlighted selected. And I'm going to use inverse here to get rid of everything else. And now I have just the network involving the people in that graph, right? Now, let's do a quick layout. And I'm going to click exit here. I'm going to use the quick layout and expand a little bit here to give space. This is the social network of people, and I'm going to use the tree. There we go. It's like it's a 3-dimensional space, so there we go. So we have these trees to show you how those people are connected, and then what are the crimes associated with those people, the locations and the officers, and so forth. And you'll see like a node like this location has a lot of crime associated with it, so that's worthy of investigation. Now let's just say I really quickly want to show captions in my graph. In this case, I want to show the name of the person, of the people involved. So I'm going to go to the project here, go to the category, select persons, and put the name as a caption using this checkbox. I can also add multiple captions. So here you'll see there's a name and a surname, which is their last name. I can add both of those if I wanted to. And if I zoom in, I'm going to see those captions. Well, those captions are small. So actually, let's go to the settings here and let's adjust those caption size. There we go. We can also adjust where those captions happen to be if we wanted to. I can put them in the bottom, left, or right. Right is a good place to put it for now. And there we go. I have those captions for those people involved in this network. And I can add captions to any other category that I want. Now let's just say I also want to caption my relationships. I can also go here and under the settings, I'm going to check the box that says show relationship name. And we're going to see those relationships shown here. Now if I zoom in, I can just sort of see what's going on a little bit better. Now let's just say that's an interesting view for beginner. I can go to the project tab here, go to the data, and log this view. Let's call it the drug crime tree. Drug crimes trees. There we go. I'm going to save this view. And then here I have a share link. So if I click that, you'll notice a new tab opens. And here on the very top is an actual share URL. You can see that because it says share right here. Now people don't have to have a GraphXR project to be able to see this. So if you want to share this outside your organization or with anybody else, you can. And they can also navigate it by zooming in and out and using the UI that you've set for your view sharing. Now if you want to customize what is shared in your view, you can visit our help center and I'll link to that documentation below as well. Alright, so going back here, I've got that view saved. I'm going to clear the graph space. I'm going to walk you through another example, and this time I'm going to look up a person, and I'm going to search the database. I have that there. I'm going to look up an officer by the name Larive. Great. So now you can see the officer shows up. The surname Larive, that's the property that I searched. I'm going to add that into the graph. Right. So now, remember the center to, we can center to a selected node or a selected group of nodes. We can also fly out when we need to. Now, this has no caption and no icon. Let's set those up right now. So with this officer icon, I can create a person icon, select it here, there we go. And then I want to go and caption this. So I go to the category tab, select officer, and under the officer I want to select the surname, perhaps the first name as well, so you can have two properties caption or more, and then close. And so there we go, we have the officer by Larive Devi, and if I quick info on this, you can see there's a badge number and a rank as well. Alright, so for Officer Larive, I want to expand to look at his crime investigations, and then from there see who's behind those crimes, what locations are involved in those crimes, and perhaps other officers investigating those crimes. Oftentimes you'll see investigations, isolated investigations happening, but the overlap happens within the social network or within the people and the places that they're investigating, right? So we want to see those connections. So starting with Larive, I'm going to select him, right click and expand, and just check the investigated by relationship, and there we go. I have these crime nodes that come in the picture, and for the time being, maybe I don't want the relationship name, clean my graph, but I do want crime to be captioned by the type of crime we have. So I'm going to do that now. Great. You can see what kinds of crime that he's investigating across the board. It includes all different kinds, from criminal damage, arson, public order. For this, just like we did before, I'm going to just look up on the drug crimes he's investigating and see what happens. So instead of searching the database, I'm going to search the graph, and I'm going to search drug, and you'll see right away that the 3 drug crime nodes are selected. Now, using the selection tools that we just went over, I want to get rid of everything else for the time being. I'm going to do an inverse selection, but you'll notice that Officer Larive is selected, and I don't want to get rid of him, so I'll just deselect him from the right legend here, and then I'll delete the other crimes. So now these drug crimes have a lot of relationships associated with them, so I'm going to select those and expand to look at the people involved in those crimes. So the people and the locations by expanding on these 2, right? And we're going to expand there. Great. So now we know this location and these 2 drug crimes actually have the same person behind them. That's cool. Alright. So far, these 2 locations are kind of isolated, but we know these 2 drug crimes are related to this person. So that's interesting. What if we keep expanding along the person network? So I'm going to select person nodes and expand. And I'm going to expand to look at who's related to this person, who might live with this person, who might have the same phone, or be in the social network with this person. Expand. Alright, now let's select, again, these people and expand one more time. Do the same thing. And see what happens. Okay, so I'm going to apply a quick layout using this quick layouts feature on the bottom toolbar. And I selected Larive as the root node, and I'm going to apply a tree layout. I'm going to Control A, use that to expand all the nodes in the graph. Cool. So now, all of a sudden, these 3 drug crimes, 2 different locations, but when you expand upon the network, you're going to notice there are certain people that overlap, right? And how do they overlap? Well, these people are connected through their social network. Okay, that's interesting. And these people live with each other. Okay. Perhaps some of these people are drug suppliers or distributors, but for right now, let's pull in the drug crimes associated with these people that we just pulled into the graph. Again, expanding with the selected nodes. To pull in the crime nodes from the people nodes, you're going to select this relationship called the party 2. You visit this graph here. Crime and persons are connected through the party 2 relationship. There we go. Expanding. Alright, so we have more crime nodes. And then those crime nodes also have locations. So let's pull in those locations. There we go. Let's reorganize this layout. Yeah. And then select everything in the graph and expand a little bit just to give their a bit more space. Okay, so now that we know that these people know each other, we also see some of these crimes in question. So what are these crimes? We have drug crimes, but we also have vehicle crime. And then we have these locations, right? And those locations have those lat-long properties. So I'm going to pull in the map one more time. Now that I have this network, I can see, okay, where these crimes are taking place across this organized crime group, so to speak, and perhaps then expand to look at who's investigating these crimes as well. Let's expand to look at who's investigating these crimes. Right. Perhaps Larive should talk to some of these people. And then I could just go to this table view, right? And these are all the officers investigating those crimes within that network. And I could just export that as a CSV file if I wanted to and say, hey, these people need to work together to understand a bit further what's going on in this drug network. And so now I'm just going to save that view. Map view and save, and there we go. Now I have a couple views that I can go back and forth on. So I can load this view that I did previously, right? Just investigating drug crimes, and then putting them in tree layout, and then this is that geospatial view that we have. So I hope that helps getting you started with the basics of graph analytics through visualization. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. info@kineviz.com. We're here to help. So until next time, stay tuned.